Shop Chat! Shop Chat!
Well, over the last few years, we've seen an exciting explosion of youth involvement in barbershop. But barbershop is indeed a hobby that can be enjoyed by all ages. And with us today on Shop Chat is an example of the enjoyment of barbershop through all ages of life. We're glad to have with us the 2018 International Silver Medalists in the Senior Quartet Contest, Easy Street. And boys, why not bring us in today with a little bit of music?
Sure thing.
Be careful what you wish for if you can't play the game. The things that you imagine, the fantasies, the fame. Don't play around with love, my dear, is my advice to you. If love can come to me, then it can find its way to you,
Right here on Shop Chat. Well, thank you very much, guys. So, Easy Street. I guess the first question I have to ask is, do you know the song Easy Street?
Well, ironically enough, everyone asks us that, and we're finally having someone record learning tracks for us, so we can finally say we know that song. Because right now, every time someone asks, we kind of go, man, sorry.
Oh, that's great. All right, well, guys, we'd love to get to know you all just a little bit better. So, tenor of Easy Street is Paul Carter. Paul, tell us a little bit about you and your non-barbershop life.
Well, the first thing I can tell you is that I just retired about a year and a half ago.
Ah.
So that's been kind of fun. I spent 35 years in a cataract surgery practice, and just love being retired now so that I can practice more, sing more, and go fishing more.
Now, maybe that's one of the benefits of being in a senior quartet. As you start to edge to retirement, you have less things on your agenda you've got to contend with.
Yeah, that's right.
Very good. And the lead singer here is Dave Cross. Dave, tell us a little bit about your non-barbershop
Well,
life.
for the last 28 years, I've made my living one form or another teaching Photoshop.
Now, wait a minute,
traveling
you
the world
said
teaching
for the
Photoshop.
last. So what last? That's the right
The
American way.
Sorry,
So
sorry.
what was that accent?
For
I
the last
detected?
28 years, I've been traveling the world teaching Photoshop. Hey,
Hey.
Very good. And you are indeed
I'm
from.
from Canada, living in Florida for the last 16 years or so.
Very good. And the bass singer, Brian, tell us about your non-barbershop life.
Well, I'm originally from South Bend, Indiana. So I've been 38 years with the local telephone company, presently Frontier. And got 3 kids and 5 grandkids, and enjoying my time, which is getting close to retirement, hopefully next month. So,
Oh, fantastic.
yeah, thanks.
Very good. And the baritone singer, Charlie Nelson. Charlie, tell us about your non-barbershop life.
Well, I'm the old guy by about 3 weeks over Paul Carter of the quartet, and my non-barbershop life, I am retired as well. Stay very busy with other non-barbershop things like history. I'm a historian of South Hillsborough County. And before I retired, I worked for state government in the guardian ad litem program for about almost 20 years.
And that has to do with children and child custody cases, that sort
Correct.
of thing?
We work with dependent children who've been abused and neglected. We were their court advocates.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Well, that's quite a kind of a stressful kind of job to have, I would imagine. I'm glad that you've got a good outlet like barbershop to
Thank you.
give you pressure relief. So how long have you guys been singing together as a quartet?
Gosh, we started in
Spent about 3 years
3 years,
now.
3
Yeah.
years ago.
I gotcha. And I realize that although you're in a senior quartet, that doesn't necessarily mean you've been singing barbershop for a long time. So who is the young whippersnapper in terms of barbershop years in the
Probably
quartet?
Paul, right?
Yes.
When did you start singing barbershop?
2005.
Okay, now how did you come to discover this?
Somebody invited me to one of the Heralds of Harmony chapter shows.
Mm-hmm.
And I always had this image in my mind of barbershop being a bunch of corny people with hats on and garters.
Yeah, the last thing we need in barbershop is people with hats and garters on, right?
So I kind of steered away from it, but I decided to go, and it was the best thing that ever happened in my music career. I wish I'd started when I was 15.
I think that's probably the universal
Yeah.
experience, right?
Did they have barbershop back then?
Now, who's the grizzled barbershop veteran of the bunch here?
Brian.
Probably me. I started in 1991, I guess, and I saw a sign that said male singers wanted with a telephone number on it, and I called, and it happened. A lot of people may know Ned Fogler,
Mm-hmm.
and he invited me down to a barbershop meeting, and I fell in love with it, and been doing it ever since.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And then just to round it out, Dave, how long have you been?
Well, I
singing
can't do the
barbershop?
math. It's 23 years, so whatever that means in terms of starting.
Gotcha.
But, for me, actually, one of the cooler parts is that I've been doing it for that long, but my son started singing when he was 13. So now he's up there with like 14 years of barbershop experience as well.
Where did you join this society?
I actually was, when I was living in Canada, I was looking, I've always been interested in singing, but never had any kind of formal training or anything, and I looked in a insert in a magazine or a newspaper that talked about just the arts, and there was a group, the Gilbert and Sullivan group, and I went, and I was so out of my depth because they were like talking language I didn't understand,
Right.
and I was like discouraged. And the next night I saw barbershop. Oh, my dad used to sing barbershop. Not that I ever saw it. And I went, and right away I was just like, yes, this is. They had me sing a tag, and I was just like, the hook was set, and I was like, although funny enough, I sang in a chorus that had 18 guys, and I thought that was standard.
Sure.
So the first time I saw like vocal majority, I was like,
Right.
what?
Right. Yeah. No. That's I think a very common experience, and it's interesting how different each of you've kind of encountered. Something as simple as one of those male singers wanted, and then a friend asks, and then seeing that insert.
Mm-hmm.
So now, Charlie, how about you? How did you get started?
Well, I first heard barbershop on something that your audience may not have ever seen, a cassette tape of a very little known group called Keepsake. It was actually the first exposure I had to barbershop. They're not unknown, obviously.
Right.
In fact, Tony DeRosa, who we all sing under with Heralds of Harmony, was part of Keepsake. And they were singing Roses of Picardy. And I was hooked from that moment on. I lived in Maryland and joined a chapter in Maryland in 1997.
Now, Charlie, that's interesting because I picked up at a music store what turned out to be the 1992 Top 20 and put it in the car as a CD. And the first song, oh, well, there. So the Way Down Yonder in New Orleans.
Oh, sure.
The second song was the same song, and it had the same impact on me, just
Right.
like somebody
Right.
inoculated. Well, very cool to
It's
hear
a great
that.
song.
We have that in common. So now, you guys competed year before last in the International Senior Quartet contest, and then again this year. And 2 years ago, you were 5th place, and then this past year, you were silver medalist, 2nd place. And I noticed looking at your scores that in between those 2 years, your score jumped 2 percentage points, which may not sound like a lot to people who don't sing in the barbershop hobby, but at the level you're singing at, that's a pretty significant jump. So I'm curious, what would you attribute that jump in scores to?
Well, I think it's a number of things. I think we've been lucky enough to have a fairly regular schedule. I mean, there's periods where someone's on vacation or traveling, but generally speaking, we've been rehearsing very regularly and also benefit from coaching. We work with David Mills quite a bit, and every so often when we can, someone else. I know personally, I would say that being a member of the Heralds of Harmony and the weekly coaching we get from Tony, just because that's what he does, that has also benefited us personally. But I think part of it too is just once we went out our first time and got a score that I think for most of us is probably one of the better scores we'd ever got in any quartet, possibly with the section of Brian. And we're kind of like, oh, so that's where we're starting without,
Right.
when we first started, it kind of, for me at least, gave me the confidence that this has got the potential if we keep working at it. And every time we thought, wow, that sounded really good, then a coach is like, well,
Right,
and points
right.
out the things you can do to, take it up a notch even
Right.
more. I think that makes a
So in
big
other words,
difference.
Paul, there's no big secret surprises here. It's just consistent work ethic to move up.
That's the main thing, and like you mentioned, being under Tony DeRosa to help us learn to sing better,
Mm-hmm.
that's a big deal. And when we went out to California for this last year's midwinter, we hadn't had a chance to practice like we needed to, and coaching we didn't get because we got ill, and we just went out on stage and decided, well, it is what it is. We're just going to be relaxed and have a good time, and that's when we did our best school.
You know?
Sure. Now, one of the things I'm curious about, as older singers, and particularly what I'm thinking about are the outside parts, bass and tenor, which I think often guys, as they get older, feel like they either start to lose some of that bottom end, or they start to lose some of the top. I'm curious, Brian and Paul, as you have gotten older as singers, what are you doing to maintain the kind of good quality singing that you're doing as a quartet?
Just try and sing every day and use the correct way of singing, you know. And said coaching from Tony has helped tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm not singing with the chorus anymore, I had some issues with my parents, so I've dropped out for a short time. But just try and sing correctly and sing every day.
Sure, sing every day. And Paul, how about you?
I would contribute it to sipping on scotch a little bit. That seems to help the vocal cords.
Right.
At least if nothing else, it makes him think he's singing at the time.
Right. Well, I'm a teetotaler, but maybe I need to start taking up that
I don't even drink scotch.
advice. That's all right. But consistent singing is
That's
the
the
key.
key.
Sure.
That is the key.
And then Dave, you and Charlie, what would you say?
Well, I would completely agree. As Dave mentioned earlier, we practice at least once a week in addition to the chorus rehearsal. And we do that consistently, even in the quote down periods like the summertime when
Right.
we can. And I think Brian's right too. Singing every day, as a senior, you can lose that pretty quickly if you don't keep working the mechanism, particularly in the ways that we're being taught to sing by Tony and others.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's that consistency.
And I noticed one thing that you've all brought up, which I think is probably important to really restate. It's like in anything, any physical activity, when you're younger, you can get away with poor, sloppy technique because you're younger. But as you get older, just any physical endeavor, if you're not, lifting the right way, if you lift weights, or if you're not running with proper form, or swimming with proper form, or singing with proper technique, it definitely, you pay a much steeper price, and you'll pay a price in the long run too, most likely. So I'm interested then, how many of you had a singing background before you started singing barbershop? Paul, what about you?
I started singing as a child in church, and I sang in my first quartet. It was a gospel quartet in high school, and we were able to travel the country quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
In college, I didn't sing too much, but after I finished college and got my career started, then I started an ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a gospel ensemble.
Oh, okay.
So I've done gospel quartets, ensembles, some little bit of solo work and weddings and things like that. So I've been doing it just about all my life.
So even though you hadn't joined the society until, I think you said 2005, you had still been actively singing in one form or another.
Yes.
All that time.
Yes.
Great.
And the shower.
Great.
that was my vocal warm-ups.
Right, sure. And Dave, how about you, singing before?
Actually, I had nothing. The only thing that was in any way formal was when I was a kid. My dad moved our family to England for 3 years because of a job, and I sang in the church choir.
Mm-hmm.
But basically faked my way through the whole, like I would hold the hymn book and not because I can't read music, so I was just like sure, and
right.
So what for me kind of planted the seed is when I was in college. I actually briefly dated a young lady who was in the opera program at McGill University, and we were at a party once and slow dancing, and I started singing. She's like, "You have a good voice, you should sing," and I was like, "Oh, come on." But then we had a guy who could play the piano in our fraternity, so we kind of sing around the piano, and I sort of by default became the guy that would lead the singing because no one else had the confidence, but it was more just I really enjoyed doing it more than anything else.
Well, great. And then Brian, how about you?
Well, my grandmother actually encouraged me to start singing when I was very young, and every holiday she would take me to church and I would sing a solo in front of the congregation, was nerve-wracking, of course,
Right.
as a young boy. And I sang an elementary chorus, and other than that, I just enjoyed singing. I've always sung to myself for my own amusement, you know.
Sure.
And I guess barbershop is when I really started singing formally in any kind of organization. So that was the beginning of my organized singing.
Sure. And then Charlie, how about you?
Well, similar to these guys, not limited experience in high school and as an adult in a few church choirs. I was a music major in college, so I had some singing.
Oh, okay.
I didn't finish because I didn't like singing solfeggiato.
Sure. Yeah. Now, did you play anything as a music major?
Poorly, yes. Played trombone and piano, and still I've continued to play piano my entire life, and then really got involved in barbershop in 1997. So.
Hey guys, it's good to have at least one music guy.
It
in
is.
the quartet, right? So
Even if
that's-
it's a poor music
That's
guy.
right.
That's right.
Hey, it's all relative. You can still know where the keys are and things the rest of us are like.
Sometimes.
That's right.
Yeah,
Very good.
Brian likes to talk about minor keys a lot.
So, one of the songs that we have really come to love every time we get to hear you guys compete is the song A Chocolate Sundae on a
Yeah.
Saturday Night, which I like for a lot of different reasons, actually. So, but I'm curious, I was completely unfamiliar with that song. Where did that song come from?
Well, that's one of our, like many quartets, our biggest challenges. And we, early on, and I don't know why, we just kind of decided as a group that we didn't want to sing the songs that everyone sang.
Sure.
So we started just digging around, and I just happened upon Jeremy Johnson as an arranger, and on his website he had, I would say about half of them you could actually, click to play a sample.
Yeah.
And as soon as I heard it, I was like, that's kind of interesting, and so we
We
gave
all
it a
like
try.
chocolate sundaes.
Well, we all like ice cream, so.
Right.
But interestingly enough, the first, I think 2 times we competed, without exception, every judge was like, I've never heard that before. And I was kind of like, yes, because we kind of had that goal to sing a song that was
Right.
interesting, but also wasn't one. Now we've sung it so many times, people are like, oh, this song.
Right.
At least for the first while, it was
So I did a
unique.
little research. I guess maybe Doris Day.
Doris
maybe
Day,
did. Now, who arranged it for you?
Jeremy Johnson was
Okay,
the
yeah.
arranger.
Well, it's interesting when you look at quartet scores because it's obvious on stage you all really enjoy singing that song, and it also happens to be your highest
Mhm.
scoring song.
Right.
Just interesting how that kind of works out,
Mhm.
right? That what you enjoy singing is,
Right,
is
sure.
also what scores very well. All right, well, guys, listen, we want to thank you so much for taking time out to be with us on this edition of Shop Chat, and we do certainly wish you the very best at the next Midwinter
Thank you.
Contest
Thank you.
when you compete. And we have a favor to ask of you. We have a little tagline here for Shop Chat, and wondered if we could get you guys to take us out with our Shop
Sure.
Chat tag.
All right.
All right.
Shop chat.
Thank you very much, Easy Street, and thank you for tuning in on this episode of Shop Chat.